What's going on, bottom line viewers? It's Mitch back here with another NFL record prediction for the 2020 regular season. In this video, I'm going to break down the Minnesota Vikings schedule for the 2020 season and give you my record prediction for their upcoming season. Before I give you my thoughts on the Vikings schedule, who they potentially will beat, who they will lose to, and ultimately their record for 2020, make sure that you do Gronk spike the like button, subscribe to the Bottom Line View for more NFL videos just like this, and comment below your opinion. Vikings fans, let me know in the comment section what you think of the team this year. You think they're going to be back in the playoffs? You think they're going to make a run in the playoffs? Or do you think they're going to take a step back this year? All right, let's take a look at their schedule. And I want to say this off the top about the Vikings, and this is going to kind of be the theme of this video for the Vikings and kind of my overall theme for the Vikings of this offseason. So I like what the Vikings have done as an organization this offseason, but I do think it has effects on this team in the short term, ultimately leading for the Vikings to be a better team in the long term, but making the team this year worse than the team last year. And understand this, okay? They've moved on from a lot of veteran players that really know the system and are trusted and good in the system. They've moved on from those players, and they've replaced them with younger, unproven players that have a lot of potential and need time to grow, okay? There are things that are good and bad about that statement, okay? They're a younger team. That's going to hurt them in the short term, but they're potentially a team with a higher ceiling, which might help them in the long term. I think moving on from Stephon Diggs is going to have an immediate effect in a negative fashion. Even if they brought in Justin Jefferson, you can't guarantee he's going to be just as good as Stephon Diggs day one. It's not going to happen, right? Their offensive line, I think, is a little worse, although some of their younger players might get a little bit better. Their secondary is much younger. While I don't think it might be as good as it was, it wasn't very good at the corner spot last year. And maybe you would say it couldn't be worse, but these players don't know the system yet. And this offseason is such a wacky one that you have to take into account that maybe these players won't be ready day one. And that's the way I'm looking at the Vikings right now. So at week number 1, they play the Packers. And as you guys know, the Packers have pretty much dominated this rivalry for the most part over the past few seasons. And that's the reason why I'm going to give the Packers the win in week 1. It's also the point of saying, okay, week 1, all these young players that are playing important roles for the Vikings won't be as in tune to what they want in terms of their systems defensively, offensively. Their corners are going to be playing one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. They have multiple young rookie starting corners this year, and they're going to be playing Aaron Rodgers in week 1. That's not an easy matchup. Week 2, they play the Colts. This game's challenging, I think, especially in Indianapolis, where the Colts, I think they can run the football. I think Phillip Rivers upgrades them. I think their defense is a little bit better this year. I do think that they will lose. I'm not really sure, honestly. I think they're going to lose. Let's say they're going to go 0-2. And then they're going to beat Tennessee. So let's take this. Oh, and then they're going to beat Houston. So let's take this in conjunction, okay? They're going to be 2-2 after the first 4 weeks. Now, am I going to be 100% accurate on who they win and lose to? I think they're going to lose 2 of these games and win 2 of ththese games. Let's just put it out like that, okay? So whether it's the Packers and the Colts they beat, maybe they'll beat Tennessee and Houston. Either way, I think they're going to be 2-2. I think the Colts is a team that matches up better with Minnesota than the other teams. I think when you look at them, they have a really good offensive coach. This game is on the road, where the Tennessee game's at home where they play better. You guys know that. And the Colts can really run the football offensively. And they pose a threat now. I think they're going to be kind of underrated early in this season with the improvements they've made. I think a guy like DeForest Buckner could have a big game. Justin Houston could have a big game versus a offensive line in the Vikings that I'm not exactly 100% convinced is great at pass blocking. And then week 3, they play Tennessee. I think they can beat Tennessee especially because this is at home. And as long as they can slow down Derrick Henry and not allow him to just completely dominate the game, they can win it. And I think Kirk Cousins is going to be able to make some plays with his arm versus a Tennessee secondary that I think is also regressed. Week 4, they play Houston. This will be challenging because Deshaun Watson. But I do think the Vikings have the much better defense in this matchup. I do think that they should be able to pass the ball, and I would actually expect this game here in Week 4 to be the Justin Jefferson breakout game. Week 5, they play Seattle. I think Seattle will win this game just because Seattle has been better versus Minnesota. Like, Seattle has owned this matchup the last 2 years that they've played, I believe. They've won both of the games that they've played. And I think they should be able to do it again, especially considering it's in Seattle. For whatever reason, Seattle, Russell Wilson, they just have, some magical thing going on there. Week 6, Atlanta. I think Minnesota should be able to win that game. I mean, Atlanta, I don't think they necessarily match up well with Minnesota. The only challenge here is Julio Jones, really. If they can cover him or not, that's really the only challenge. But I do see Minnesota being able to get some pressure on Matt Ryan in this game. Of course, again, this is another home game, so that makes me more confident about it. And I do think Dalvin Cook can find success versus this front. Then you go into Week 8, which, will they get swept by Green Bay? I don't think so. I think they're going to find a way to beat them after the bye week, have an extra week of preparation, come back and win that game. Week 9, they play Detroit. I think they'll beat Detroit the first time they play them. I think they'll lose to Detroit the last time they play them. I think they're going to split with Detroit. So either way, I think they're going to split with Detroit. I think they have played very well versus Detroit. They have last year they dominated them in both games, even with Matt Stafford in the lineup. But I think a lot of people are sleeping on the talent that Detroit has now. And with Matt Stafford, this team is a much better team. And I don't think people are giving them much of a chance. But I do think they're actually much better than people want to give them credit for. So this is a rivalry game. It's an NFC North matchup. And I think one of these games, Matt Stafford will outduel Kirk Cousins and win the game. Week 10, they play Chicago in Chicago, which they typically struggle. So I'm going to give that to Chicago on Monday night. Even more difficult to win that game. Week 11, they play Dallas. I think Dallas is a really good team, really talented, going to be very challenging to match up with all those weapons they have. But I do think Minnesota will win because it's in Minnesota and they beat them last year. And I do think that Minnesota can probably be able to run the ball with Dalvin Cook, hit some play action down the field versus this defense, and keep Dallas off the field offensively. Week 12, they play Carolina at home. They should win that game. Week 13, they play Jacksonville at home. They should win that game. Week 14, they play Tampa Bay. This is a game they could possibly win. It's not going to be an easy game to win because you're playing Tom Brady later in the season. He's going to be more capable within the offense. He's going to have a better chemistry with his teammates. And I think overall, Tampa Bay is going to be better as the season wears on, and that's why I'm going to go with Tampa Bay. Week 15, Chicago at home. They should win. Week 16, they play New Orleans. And I think I'm missing a loss for them in here somewhere. But either way, I have Minnesota losing to New Orleans finally in New Orleans. I know Vikings fans are probably going to say, what do you mean? What do you mean? They're going to beat New Orleans again. Hey, you can only get lucky so many times versus the Saints. I will say this. They outplayed them in the playoff game. But, that Case Keenum one, dude, that was so lucky. That was so fortunate. I think New Orleans is eventually going to beat them. One of these days, eventually. For some reason, I had written down that they had 7 losses. But I can't seem to figure out which of the teams I gave them a win versus that is not showing up. Okay, yeah, 9-7. All right, so there we go. All right, so it was the New Orleans game. So there you go. That's a Friday. That's actually on Christmas Day. So that's pretty cool. That game's going to be awesome to watch. And I think finally Drew Brees, Sean Payton, they finally get their revenge versus the Vikings. And I think it only helps that this game will be played in New Orleans for them on Christmas Day. If they lose on Christmas Day to the Vikings, their entire world will shatter. So I think they will win that game. So overall, I have the Vikings at 9-7. I could see them going 10-6. When you do compare this, or even 11-5, I could see them going as bad as probably 8-8. Like, that's probably the low end for them. I think 9-7 is about the sweet spot. 9-7, 10-6. I think that's probably where they land. When you look at their schedule, I think it is a lot easier than Green Bay. Green Bay has a ludicrous schedule this year, especially where they play a lot of these teams. But just like Green Bay, they play Tampa Bay in Tampa Bay, and they play New Orleans in New Orleans. That sucks, okay? They also play Seattle in Seattle, and they play Houston in Houston. They play Indy in Indy. These are all teams that I think, and at least they play Dallas at home. Like, that's something positive. And I think people are sleeping on Detroit, and Detroit has the easiest schedule out of all three teams. So right now, I have them tied with Detroit at the top of the division, which might sound crazy to some of you. And I have Green Bay second and Chicago last. But that's the way I see it right now for the Vikings. I think they're a 9-7, 10-6 team. I think they need to take a step back to take 2 steps forward because of their young players, and this is also a more difficult schedule. So, yeah, I think the Vikings are a solid team, probably even a playoff team, but I don't quite see them being a dominant team in 2020. Peace.